Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. And today we're talking about wishing that people would behave differently. Because if you're anything like me, you probably find yourself thinking fairly frequently, I wish they would do this. I wish they wouldn't do that. I wish they would just. Overall, wishing that people would behave differently. And when we're at work, we are not immune from this. So maybe it's a team member, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a client. And we find ourselves thinking, I wish they would just, if only they would just. Or why can't they just? If only everyone would behave exactly the way that we wanted them to at all times, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't our lives just sail by and become so much easier if only everyone would do exactly what we wanted all of the time? Yeah, that's how the logic goes in my head as well. But you know what? Never happens. So every now and again, I'm coaching a client and they describe a situation that they're struggling with. And there's a person involved in that situation that they're struggling with. And sometimes, because I'm a coach, I ask the question, what would you like to have happen? Now, I'm trying to ascertain in this situation they're telling me about, in this struggle that they're having, what do they actually want to happen? What's their ideal scenario? And occasionally, I realize that I've asked slightly the wrong question because they respond, for instance, I want Catherine to stop being so dominating and let me do things in my own way. So I want to know, as the coach, what does this client actually want out of this situation? Where are they trying to get to? And they tell me that what they want is for Catherine to stop being so dominating and let them do things in their own way. And then we have a problem. We have a problem because the outcome that they want is predicated on someone else's action, i.e., at this point, Catherine is the one that's going to have to do something differently in order to resolve the problem, which is a bit of an issue. The problem here is that we don't really have any control over what Catherine does or doesn't do. Now, there may be some instances where Catherine is your direct report and you do have some control, or at least a lot of influence over what she does or doesn't do. But let's say in this scenario that Catherine is someone that we do not control, we cannot direct, and yet, in order to solve this problem that we're having, we need Catherine to do something differently. So we're totally stuck, right? If my solution to this problem is Catherine needs to do something differently, then where do I go from there? How do I solve that problem? I could come up with ways in which I could try to manipulate Catherine into behaving the way that I want, which might work. But most of the time, I find that's probably just a waste of energy. So do you ever find yourself doing this? Do you ever find yourself thinking, I just need them to do this so that I can do that? I just need them to think this way so that we can do this. I just need them to change in this way so that X happens. It's a common thing for us to think. And I wanted to bring it to the podcast because it comes into my coaching room fairly often. So I'm guessing that maybe it could also be a struggle or an obstacle for you. And if it is, you may find yourself getting frustrated, annoyed, resentful, angry, or you may even go to the other end of the stage and just become really passive, really agreeable, just disengage. Because at this point, unless somebody else changes, apparently you have no power. At this point, you have no control. They're the one responsible for making the change, which is going to do something, which is going to create something, which is going to change the scenario or negate your struggle. I don't know if you're like me and you found that Generally, or very often, it's difficult to get people to change. Even when we wish that somebody would behave differently, that is really the operative word. It's a wish. I wish they would behave differently. And a wish ain't a solution. It's nowhere near, in fact. And what it can do, when I see clients in this way of thinking, and I know when I get in this way of thinking, it blocks me, and I can see that it blocks clients from thinking, okay, what's my part in this? What can I do? What could I influence? What do I have control over here that might help? And I've seen people being blocked from that type of thinking, both in situations where they do not have any control over this person, i.e., they are not their direct report, and in situations where they actually are their direct report. So let's take both of those in turn and use a couple of examples so we can illustrate it and help you to think it through. So let's say the instance where somebody isn't your direct report. So let's say it's a senior person, let's say it's a boss or a senior leader in your organization. And let's say they're often giving you kind of vague or last minute instructions for important projects. Let's say they expect you to kind of understand their vision with very minimal direction, and it can leave you feeling a bit anxious and unprepared. In this situation, you might think, right now they're kind of vague and last minute. And I need them to be clear and give me information in good time. Now, you may wish upon a star. You may blow the candles out on your birthday cake and make a wish that your boss becomes clear, direct, and always gives you instructions in good time. But that wish doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen. But while you're wishing away and thinking that they should be different or thinking they should be behaving differently, what you're probably not going to be doing is engaging your own thinking around how you might need to be behaving differently in order to account for their behavior. Now, I'm giving you this as an example because I've seen it many times. If only bosses would just behave in the way that bosses should. Only, how often does that actually happen? We all have this blueprint, don't we, in our head of how people should behave. A senior leader should behave like this. A boss should behave like that. But how often do they actually match up to the expectations that we have for them? Sometimes they do, and that's great. Maybe even you've had some kind of dream boss that matches up every time. I'm really pleased for you. But very often, people do not match up to the expectations. They do not match up to the way in which we think they should behave. And do you know what? They just persist in behaving the way that they want to behave or the way that they do behave. And all the while, we're over here thinking something should be different. But what's the reality? It's not. That's how they behave. They often give you vague or last minute instructions, and they expect you to understand their vision with minimal direction. Now, instead of just wishing they were different or thinking they should be different, how about you just drop it? And I'm not saying this by way of telling you what to do, but I'm suggesting it as a possibility that you may not have considered. What happens? Let's see if you just dropped it. And you just notice, factually, that they often give you vague last minute instructions and they expect you to understand their vision with minimal direction. Okay? That's what they do. Now, if we don't have any thought in our mind that they should be any different, and we just accept that that's the way they are, what next? At that point, with a client, they always come up with some really interesting ideas and some really interesting solutions about how they could try and understand the vision through written documentation that they've produced, how they could watch a webinar that they released a year ago when they talked about what their vision was, how they could be really curious in a meeting with them and maybe ask them a few clarifying questions to see if what they're thinking is correct. how they might need to pad more time into a project timeline because they know that probably they may get some last minute instructions which could alter things. Plan that in, have time, be ready with the team to make those changes that you know might be coming. All of those things, all of that thinking, all of that solutions and those creative ways in which you could still do your job come a lot more easily, in my experience, once you've accepted the fact that that is the way your boss is. Interesting things come out when you think that's the way they are. Okay, what can I do? How can I work with that? What do I have the power to influence? Maybe there's some things that even are within your control that you weren't noticing before. Maybe there's some things that you just have the power to influence. Maybe there's some things that you just have the power to notice. The next example is a colleague example. So, again, you don't have any authority over this person, they're not a direct report, and you have a colleague on your team who you feel tends to dominate in meetings. You notice that they often speak over other people. Sometimes they dismiss people's ideas. You think their input is valuable, but you don't think they allow space for other people to contribute. Now, in this scenario, you may wish that they were different. You may wish that they behaved differently. You may wish that they didn't dominate in meetings. You may want them to stop speaking over others and dismissing other people's ideas. You may want them to give more space for other people to contribute. Okay. So, what's actually in your control in this scenario? I'd really want to know that with a client. Let's say we can't control this person. We don't have the power to order them to change. And even if we did, they might not. So, if we just drop the idea that they should be any different, or we should have the power to control them because we don't, then what? What does that open up? If you think, okay, they're going to be in this meeting, they might dominate, they might speak over other people, they might dismiss their ideas, they might not allow space for other people to contribute. So I could have a chat with a couple of other people and make sure that we back each other's ideas. I could have a word with the person who chairs the meeting and say, I've noticed that it can be difficult for other people to contribute. Would you be able to support and bring people into the conversation? Maybe you're even in a position to bring people into the conversation. Maybe you're even in a position to say, hey, I didn't hear Rebecca's point and I'd like to. Rebecca, sorry, could you finish? You might come up with all kinds of ideas as to what's actually in your control and what you have the power to influence. But you're probably not going to do that if you were just wishing they would be different. What often happens in a situation like that, and I've seen this because I've seen this myself, is a tendency to disengage at that point and just think, oh, what's the point? Not going to bother saying anything. Right, waste of time. And you may choose to do that. But let's say you still think it's valuable to be in that meeting. You still think it's valuable for your voice to be heard, for other people's voices to be heard, for there to be a discussion, for there to be more contribution. Then think about what you have control over. And maybe if you don't have control over something, what you could at least influence. And challenge yourself to really think about that and write that down. Because what happens in this kind of, I wish they were different thinking is that you can become a bit powerless whilst you're wishing somebody were different or just thinking somebody should behave differently. You might not take the steps that you could take in order to change things. Now, you can still wish that that person behaved differently, but maybe you can be responsive to the situation too. Maybe you can notice what's going on. You've seen this tendency. So maybe now it's on you to think about what you can influence, to think about what you control, to think about how you could do something differently. Maybe you're the one that could turn this meeting around. Maybe you're the one that could get everybody engaged and contributing. How about that? My third example is an example where someone actually is technically within your control. I say control because, I mean, what human that isn't incarcerated is really within anyone's control? They're not really, but they may submit to your control or at least your guidance as their line manager if they're your direct report. And let's say you've got a direct report who consistently misses deadlines, doesn't take ownership of their mistakes. You've tried to give them feedback, but they become defensive, make excuses, and this leads to more delays. You feel so frustrated that you just start doing stuff yourself instead of giving it them back to get fixed before it goes out to a client. I hear this from clients a lot. Sometimes it's a practical issue about timetabling and the time that people need things in. But very often, there's this issue of they should be different. I wish they were behaving differently. And whilst you might wish they were behaving differently, and whilst you might think they should be behaving differently, you've really got to think about this from your own perspective and say, well, that is the way they're behaving right now. So if we see the reality for what it is, then what? Where do you go from there? Then you can start to think about, well, actually, what is within your control? Can you have a formal meeting with them? Can you be really clear about your expectations and hold them to it? Can you give them more support with something? Can you buddy them up with someone? Could you delegate differently? Could you set a timetable knowing that this is what happens with this person? Could you be really clear about what gets sent where, when? Right, there are many, many things that you could do and that your brain would definitely come up with if you weren't stuck in the cycle of thinking they should be different. Yeah, maybe they should. Maybe that's ideal. Maybe it's even in their job description. But the reality is right now that they're not. That is what they're doing. That is the reality. So now, over to you. What can you influence? What can you control? What can you change? That's going to have a good impact on the situation. That's going to get you to the result that you want. Potentially either this person performing or them not being in the team. And, it sounds like I'm being flippant about that. I'm not. I know that that is treacherous and difficult territory for a lot of people. But I'm just using it to illustrate that when we're stuck in this, they should be different, we can stay stuck in a situation. We can stay stuck in vague and last minute issues with a boss. We can stay stuck with a colleague in meetings who's completely dominating. We can stay stuck with a direct report who's consistently missing deadlines and not taking ownership for errors. And they're not situations that you necessarily want to be stuck in. You may not be able to change the other person in the scenario, but you may be able to change how you're approaching it, how you're thinking about it. And you may, if you do that, notice that actually there are some times where you have some control. There are some times where you at least have some influence. There are some areas where at least if you gave it your best shot, there's a chance that something could be different. All right. That is all I have for you this week. If you want to come and work with me directly, if you want to grow your professional confidence, there's 2 ways for you to do that right now. Number 1, if you're a professional woman, is to come and join us inside the Members Club. We have bi-monthly trainings, everything from how to quiet your inner critic, how to grow your professional confidence, how to be more assertive, how to deal with self-doubt. They're just some of the ones that we've got coming up at the moment. We have live coaching. We have a learning library that you can dig into 24/7, and we have a private podcast. Everything is directed towards supporting and helping you as you navigate all of the stuff that your career throws at you. The second way is to come and work with me one-on-one. And in that setting, we'll have a call to make sure that I can help you. If I can't help you, I'll tell you. And if I can, I'll explain how it works and how I work with clients to unpack your challenges, really identify what they are, and really see where is it you want to get to? How is it you want to be feeling at work? What is it you want to be doing? And then we'll work one by one on those challenges to eliminate them until you get where you want to be. All right. I will see you in next week's episode.
Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident.